The goal of this video is to make sure you get acquainted with the technology Git. Git is a version control system which was actually created by Linus Torvalds. He is the same person who created Linux, which is the most popular which is a most popular operating system for programmers. So I'm going to make sure you get acquainted with this, and the most important thing is you'll be using this every day if you're a software developer, and this is one of the challenges or technologies that I found most useful in my journey. So my goal is to make sure I effectively convey this knowledge to you. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder, and I'm just going to call this test. This is in my desktop, and then I'm going to open my terminal at the location of this folder. Since I'm on a Mac, I'm going to be opening the terminal. If you're on Windows, I recommend you use Git Bash, and if you're on Linux, use your default terminal. So most of the commands I'm going to be using are Unix commands, and they should work on Git Bash also. So the first thing you have to do is install Git. Um, I've done a tutorial already on this. If you're on Windows, you should be able to download Git Bash. Even on Mac OS, Linux, you should be covered. So to verify that Git has been installed, all you have to do is type git space dash dash version, and should print out the version number of Git installed. So now that we have installed Git, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm already inside my folder, so I'm going to create a few files to play around with. So using the touch command, I'm going to create a HTML file, and I'm going to create a simple text file, a txt. So I have two files created. Now Git, as I said before, is a version control system. It helps you manage different versions of your project or manage your file history. So it makes it easier if you have any unwanted changes, or if you want to quickly revert back to your previous version because something's gone terribly wrong, or you just want to keep everything coherent. For all of this, Git is very helpful, especially if it's a large project with multiple files. So the first thing you want to do to use Git is to initialize it inside your folder. So I'm going to say git init, and this initializes a Git repository. It creates an empty Git repository. So once you do this, you see this message saying that empty Git repository has been initialized. So basically it creates a few hidden folders and hidden files. So normally you shouldn't be able to see this if you open this up, but then there are actually hidden files which won't be normally seen. So if you type ls or ls-a, you should be able to see these hidden files. So you see this .git folder. We could go into it by saying cd.git and then say ls again, and you see all these files. So we don't want to play around with these files, but just to show you that they're there. So we've played around with these files. Now the concept that I want to get you familiar and get the most important thing is the concept of making commits. So in Git, every time you want to create a new version or have a new state of your project, you create a commit. So you add different files that you've changed to the commit, and you specify a name for the commit, a message for the commit, so you know what change you've mentioned and why this is a new version of your project. So I have two empty files. Now I'm going to open up my text file using the nano command line editor, and all I'm going to do is type out hello. So I'm going to save this with the keyboard shortcuts I can see below, and I'm going to exit. So I've made some changes. Now there's a command called Git Status. So using this command, you should be able to see the general Git status. You should be able to see if there are any untracked files, if there are tracked files which have been changed, if there are new files, if some files have been deleted. Is your working branch clean, or is there any changes being there? So to check all of these, your general status of the current branch or any other branch, you can use Git Status. So you can see the untracked files over here which are mentioned. So currently we're not tracking the files. All we did was initialize an empty Git repository. So we see the two files and we see this usage. We can say git add and then the file name to include them in the commit. So this is what we're going to be doing next. And I had mentioned the name branches before, so I'm going to be talking about this once we make our first commit. So what we're going to do is we have two untracked files. Now I'm going to say git add. Now what git add does is it adds our files to the staging area. The next thing we're going to do is make a commit using git commit. So this takes all the files in the staging area and makes a commit using them. So we can choose to add files selectively. I could say hello.txt, or if I want to add all the files, I could just say git add and then a dot or a period. So this adds all the files to the staging area. So this is my hello.txt and my index.html. Next I do git commit, and then I add an m flag like this, space, and then inside double quotes or single quotes, I usually use double quotes, I specify the name of my commit. So this commit includes the two files that I added to the staging area in the previous command. So now my commit message, I'm going to say initial commit, something that's very descriptive and actually is meaningful so that you could refer to it afterwards. So I'm going to hit enter and you should be able to see the output. So now if I say git status again, you should see on branch master, nothing to commit, my working tree is clean. So we've made our first commit. So similarly, every time we make a change, we could add the files that we want to add for our commit using the git add command, and then we can say git commit and specify our commit message to make our commit. So this way we save multiple states or multiple versions of a project that we could revert to in the future. So let's talk about branches now. So by default, when you initialize empty git repository, you are in the master branch, and recently they've been changing this to call it the main branch. So master or main, anything's okay. The important thing is to know is that it's the default. So Git has this concept called branches, where you could create something similar to a separate timeline. So if everything's working fine and if you have your main branch, but then you suddenly think you want to create your own new experimental feature, you're just working on it, you don't know if it's going to work or not, and what you work on could have probable bugs or something that breaks your entire application. So if something doesn't work properly, you don't want to affect your main code. So you could create this on a separate branch, and once everything's okay, then you can merge it back with your main branch. So how do you create a new branch? So there's a git branch command, and I'm going to create a branch called test. So now what I can do is I could use the git checkout command. So I could say git checkout and then the name of my branch to move into it. So now you can say it says switch to branch test. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say git status again, and I see that I'm on branch test and I'm not on branch master anymore. So any commits I make over here, any changes I make to the files right now, so all I could do is come here, open up this file with whatever text editor and make changes to that. And if I make a commit after making those changes, those commits are on my test branch. So I could keep working on this, and whenever I want, I could also go back to the master branch by saying git checkout master. Now if I say git status again, we can see we're on the branch master. I could switch between branches like this. Now if I feel everything's okay, if I want to merge it finally, if I want to merge my test branch with my master branch, I can say use the git merge command. So git merge test. So I can now, since I didn't make any changes, it says already up to date, but if there were changes, it would check the changes, make sure there's nothing conflicting. If there was something conflicting, you would have to manually accept or reject changes or modify the changes. Once everything's okay, it would merge it for you. So that's the major part. Now this is just the basics to Git, so I'm not going to talk about the rebase command, but it's similar to merge. It does have some differences, but you could use rebase also. Now I'm going to add an article in the description which talks about the merge command, the rebase command, the revert command, and the reset command, and that should be quite helpful. So we've talked about merging, we've talked about branches, we've talked about how to add files to the staging area when you make changes, and how to commit those files to create a separate version. Now you've made all your commits, all your project's going fine, but if there's something wrong, if you want to go back to the previous commit, what do you do? So to do this, first I'm going to make another change right now. I'm going to open up my HTML file using the nano editor, and I'm going to add a simple HTML tag over here, and I'm going to attempt to save this. So we've exited and we've made a save here. We've written to the file. Now I'm going to say git status again. Now we don't see the output as untracked files, but we see something else, changes not staged for commit. So Git is tracking this file. Previously we weren't tracking the file, but since we've added to the staging area once, we don't have to track it again. So the first time, until you track a file for the first time, it's going to not track it for you. So since we have added it, it's tracking it for us, and now we can directly use git add as before. And I'm going to just add everything, which is only index.html right now, and I'm going to make a new commit, specify a message. I'm going to add updated HTML file as my commit message. I'm going to enter. So it makes my commit. Now if I say git status should be clean. Now there's a command called git log which specifies all the logs. Now the first output that you see is the most recent, and it's in this kind of chronological order. So you see my initial commits at the bottom and then my most recent commit as at the top. Now every commit has its unique ID. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say git log again, but I'm going to add an optional flag. This flag is called one line. So this makes sure every commit message this is only specified on one line and provides this shorter version of our ID. So I'm currently on this commit. This is my most recent commit. Now there is a reset command that we can use to move back to the previous commit. So I'm going to use git reset, and then I'm going to specify my commit ID, my unique ID, which in this case I'm going to go back to the previous commit, my initial commit, which is dd 4441a. And I have unstaged changes after reset. So my index.html, obviously there were changes which have not been staged. So I'm going to say git status again. So I can see that index.html is modified, but I've not staged it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my index.html, or I'm going to use a cat command instead to just print out the content. So as you can see, my text that I've changed in my most recent commit was actually updated HTML file. I can still see it even though I've reset it, but as you can see in this previous command that I mentioned, it's modified and it's not added to the staging area. So let's do one last thing. Let's do git log and add the optional one line flag. So now I can see I am back at my initial commit. But what you have to understand is that you go back to the previous commit, but your changes that you've made, they're still there. The only thing is your commit isn't there. So that's how the reset command works. So that's the basic of Git. I hope you understood, and if you would like to see any complex commands or any other technology in the future, please let me know in the comments and share this video. Thank you for watching.